world look like if there was just one culture to rule them all? We're going to refer to this as the cultural singularity, and there's a chance colonialism may have a hand in whether or not this comes to pass. But first, what exactly is colonialism? Colonialism is basically the establishment, exploitation, maintenance, acquisition, and expansion of a colony in one territory by a power from another. The balance of power is in favour of the colonizer, who often seizes full political and economical control over the colonized territory. As you can imagine, the locals don't often take too kindly to this. If we look towards visual culture in the Western colonial period, we can see an abundance of influences from colonial ideas. American Progress, 1872 by John Gast, portrays the colonial belief of manifest destiny that was prevalent in the United States during the 19th century. This belief was that the American people had an essential duty to redeem and remake the West. You can see this clearly in the way the educated Columbia, personified as an angel, brings light into the dark West, leaving behind a trail of progress. The depicted primitive Native Americans are unable to do anything but flee from their colonizers. But hold up! That's the 19th century, you say. How is this relevant to us today? Well, over the past 50 years, thanks to the global expansion of capitalism, we've seen the rise of corporate powers. These powers are growing independent of nation states, resultingly giving birth to a more modern corporate colonialism. Today, multinational corporations replace nation states as colonizers, imposing corporate power over smaller states in the form of resource exploitation and cultural assimilation. As seen in China through their manufacturing industry, there's been a huge shift in power from governments to companies. Multinational corporations, as economic powerhouses, now provide the main source of employment and have the capacity to generate a greater source of income than the state, as well as having the ability to cut wages and reformulate conditions of labour. An example is Coca-Cola, who re-entered India in 1991 after foreign corporation laws were loosened. The incentives for Coca-Cola were in the low cost of labour, expansion to the Indian market, and the free supply of water. Until recently, the Indian government turned a blind eye towards the terrible environmental impacts being caused by the factories on the local water supply due to the immense wealth the factories brought to the country. If you take a look at any Coca-Cola advertisement from the 1990s in India, you realise they weren't just exploiting resources, but also assimilating Indian culture with Western consumerism. This colonizing of culture can be similarly observed in the globalization of McDonald's. With more than 36,000 restaurants around the world, McDonald's is serving more people per day than the entire population of Thailand. McDonald's doesn't just infect countries with Western consumerism, but does so while merging with part of the culture of the country. When you come back from an overseas trip, a friend might ask, "What's McDonald's like over there?" Showing more interest in how McDonald's has gone about merging into the culture than in the country itself. This is where we start to see the idea of cultural singularity begin to emerge. Language is one particular aspect of culture that we've observed this in. While a few hundred years ago there was an estimated 10,000 languages spoken around the world, today there's only around 6,000, 2,000 of which have less than 1,000 people who can speak them. Due to globalization, languages without a major function have been relegated to the status of cultural artifact and are being replaced by major languages which themselves are merging together. In a case study for Transference, 1994, Xu Bing explores this idea of languages colliding. The artwork consists of two pigs, a boar and a sow, covered with English and Chinese writing respectively, which are directed to mate with each other over a pile of books. Through this work, Bing depicts the social intercourse between two cultures and the impregnation of languages amongst different nations. Drawing on traditional colonial ideas of male dominance, Bing demonstrates that despite having fewer speakers, English is the dominant language in terms of international trade and communication. If we look further at this colliding of languages, we notice it isn't foreign to pop culture either, represented through children's movies and television. 1986, Pingu was aired as a mainstream children's program, where penguins spoke Penguinese, a combination of Swiss German, French, English, and intelligible sounds. More recently, in 2010, Universal Pictures released Despicable Me, whose minions speak Mignonese, a mashup of Spanish, Portuguese, English, Italian, French, and Indian. The new language seems to make no sense, yet viewers are still able to understand and appreciate the character interaction. Perhaps over time, the merging of languages may result in a single, universal language, such as those presented in pop culture, that transcends borders. What's interesting to note is how drastically this all plays out on the internet. 55% of the most frequently visited websites are in English, compared to only 2% in Chinese. The web, while escaping being defined as a country, doesn't escape the reach of colonialism. Right now, Google basically sits as the gatekeeper to the information on the web, exploiting data to better direct you to the information you apparently need. By privileging English as the dominant language of the web, those that can't converse in this language become excluded. Yet what's emerging is a distortion of language, giving birth to internet slang. What used to be abbreviations of words are becoming words in their own right. LOL! The question is, in the future, would an altered form of English, which has been changed through online communications, be the supreme language? Or would nations refuse to submit to the dominance of one language, different from their own, and maintain their national identity through language?